hanging around with all these folks in law school that had this very traditional track of what a successful lawyer is. And boy, you hang around that long enough and it's like a whirlpool. You just get whipped into that, and suddenly it's like, okay, I have to be successful too. This is what I better do. But at some point, you can lose yourself and lose your heart if you're not really passionate about it. And that's the point I was at. And thank goodness I had folk in my life that I could go and talk to about that. And what I decided is I needed to go back to what I really wanted to do. And I really wanted to work with people who were vulnerable, people who were the most vulnerable amongst us and were being taken advantage of by systems and did not have a voice. And I wanted to participate and be kind of a voice. And here I was a lawyer. It's like, golly, that's got to be good for something. But what's the job where you get to do that? Instead of just on this case-by-case basis, how do you do that in a way that really impacts communities and systems? And those are the questions I had. Again, not knowing what's the name of the job. Where do you go to do that? And I didn't know that. So in talking with folk, one of the things that a number of people told me is you should be really working on the nonprofit side, but around philanthropy, where you really look at developing programs and responses to whole communities. You've got a lot of great refugee experience. And, why don't you look at that? And so I ended up taking a volunteer position with the United Way. The United Way has a program that still exists today almost in every city around the country, where they get citizens to come in, and they're really looking for people from all different professions and backgrounds to come in and participate and be a volunteer on what at least I don't know what they call it today, but they used to call it their allocation committee, where you come in and work with other citizens and review a lot of different agencies, a lot of different proposals for needs, and you decide and help the United Way decide where should the money go. Well, that sounded really interesting, and I also knew some about agencies, having worked for one in my earlier career. So I did that, and we had a volunteer orientation. And in that volunteer orientation, I remember the HR, the human resource person from United Way, came and spoke with us and thanked us for our volunteer commitment, and then talked about professional positions in the United Way also. Well, remember I said I never understood, what's the jobs where you really get to work on these issues? Oh my gosh, she started describing all these jobs. Who knew? Where they want people, you have to relate to different communities, you have to develop programs, you have to work with community centers, nonprofit agencies, churches, government, and they develop initiatives and collaborations. And I just thought, I didn't know any of that occurred, and I just thought that's where I want to be. I don't want to just be a volunteer. Now I want to work for this group, and I would love to help them do that. So the next thing I did, of course, is I offered to take that woman out for coffee. And I took her out to coffee, and I hadn't even started volunteering yet, and I just said I'd love to hear more, and told her about my background. And one of the tough things is when you have a resume that tells how many cases you've won and how many, all the kind of law things. It's like, how do you translate that? Sometimes you have to learn, when you don't have a direct path in your career, you have to learn how to kind of translate your experience in different ways, and think about the skills you've actually gained and how that might apply in different situations. And that's kind of what I had to do. Anyways, long story short, that was my next career jump. Is I took a very significant pay cut and moved into the nonprofit world and became what was called a program manager for the United Way. And of course, they assigned me all the refugee groups and communities, which was great. And because if you remember, my heart was really for people who were vulnerable. And to me, when you're a new refugee in the United States, you face all the vulnerabilities and all the issues that migrating people do. And so I got right in the middle. So my income had just reduced by so much, and I was never happier. And because I was back with my heart, and I was able to use all my skills and my experience. And really, I've never returned to the practice of law, but I feel like I use that law degree and that law education all the time because it really teaches you a way to think, a way to look at issues and questions. And so I'm very thankful for that, even though it was a very short-lived path.